So, welcome everyone. At LRXD, we believe in a brighter and bolder future where health and happiness become accessible to all. Our digital talk series, Take Care Tuesday, is focused on giving us all a deeper dive into some of the practices and opinions from some of the top thinkers today in health and wellness, creativity, futurism, social activism, environmental activism, and futurism. And this week, I'm honored to be having a conversation with author and journalist Adam Skolnick. Adam is an award-winning independent journalist and author covering adventure sports, environmental issues, travel, and human rights for the New York Times, Outside, Playboy, and Lonely Planet. He is the author of One Breath, Freediving, Death and the Quest to Shatter Human Limits, my personal favorite, and the ghostwriter and narrator of David Goggins' smash hit memoir and audiobook, Can't Hurt Me, Master Your Mind, and Defy the Odds. And he is the co-host of the Rich Roll podcast. So first of all, just thank you for being here, Adam. I really appreciate it. It's awesome to see you and just connect.
Thanks for having me. It's fun to be here.
We'd love to hear just your backstory, how you got into journalism and your, the deeper connection that you have to environmental activism specifically.
Sure. My first job out of college was running campaign offices for the Sierra Club. This was in the 90s. It was about protecting ancient forests. There was they were threatened in Pacific Northwest, and it was kind of like this dividing line that Sierra Club wanted to, for the first time, take it to the people and get people out on the streets, canvassing, going door to door, and asking people to sign on. So we were doing that. We were raising money. This is now people are on the corners or coming up to you at stores with these kinds of asks. But at the time, we were going door to door. And so that was my first job out of college, kind of getting into it, mostly for kind of the organizing experience. I wasn't like super connected to the environment in terms of why I wanted to protect it, what it meant to me personally. It was more like, okay, this is a chance to learn how to be a community organizer and organize people towards this other goal of social justice or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that. But as I started working there, I obviously was getting out into nature more and more. Growing up, although I was at the beach all the time and in the ocean, I didn't really get out into the mountains too much. And I got more interested in that. And I got a growing kind of deeper connection to nature as I started to do that work over the first couple of years out of college. And at the same time, I was trying to figure out how to write. And most of that was just like me scribbling in a journal while I was high or something like that. It wasn't really anything serious. And then after that, I got another job in a nonprofit here locally in Los Angeles, planting trees with kids at schools and in the mountains around LA. And again, I mean, I was at that point kind of deeper connected to the environment as something that I really felt strongly about protecting, and how we relate to that, and how it's the foundation of everything. And developing kind of a wellness practice, getting into yoga, and kind of how that plays into the whole spiritual aspect of it. So that was happening for me, but that was all before I decided to become a writer. And then one day I just realized I needed to figure out what I wanted to do for my life, for me. And I had the opportunity to go to Africa to climb Kilimanjaro. So I took a leave of absence to do that. And while I was away, I realized I wanted to try to write my way around the world. And I didn't really have any sort of understanding of how that would work. I didn't study journalism. I didn't take any writing classes. And although I thought I was pretty good at turning a phrase, I just had never even thought about doing a piece of journalism. So when I came back, that was kind of my focus. Like, how would I go about doing that? And so I ended up walking 3 major streets in LA, Wilshire, Santa Monica, and Sunset Boulevards, from beginning to end. And I wrote a story about that. And that kind of got circulated, and I ended up meeting an editor of a now defunct local publication here. And they liked it, and they asked me to do something similar for them, just in a different neighborhood of LA. And that was my very first job And at that point, I did it, and it was like a few $100, and I was waiting for my check, and never came. And finally, I showed up at their offices, and they were literally packing and like getting out of town. And I got there, and they cut me a check. And if I hadn't come that day, I never would have got paid. And I always think, I'm like, if I didn't get paid for that, I would never have been a professional. But that was, I should have got out of the business right then. That should have been my sign. But no, I stayed with it, and really just over the course of many years and lots of ups and downs, I ended up fast forward that to 2007 and started working with Lonely Planet and doing guidebooks. And so for the next, I would say 7 years straight, I was doing, 3 of those jobs a year. So I was on the road 9 months a year. And I was able to kind of see that vision of traveling, writing my way around the world. It kind of came to fruition. But there's a lot that happened between my defunct publication first job and that, but that's kind of the short version. And then eventually, as you're doing the Lonely Planet stuff, although I loved it, and I still love it, and that brand is like always meant a lot to me as a traveler, and it certainly saved my ass as a writer, because I was in debt, I was having eviction notices, and then I got hooked up with Lonely Planet. I was able to make a living without having to sweat. And then, I mean, you're sweating, but you don't have to worry about money coming in. Mm-hmm. And then, but then I started to think, well, this isn't storytelling. It's great, it's fun, it's good for me, but there's no real, where's the storytelling? Where's the thing that I fell in love with wanting to be a writer? And then how am I building something for me? Because these jobs are good enough, I could make a living, but I have to get the next one and get the advance for that to be able to keep going. And so it was kind of a hamster wheel, a really fun hamster wheel. But in the meantime, relationships were kind of deteriorating because I'm gone all the time. And so I kind of looked at the next thing, and somehow ended up in the Bahamas in 2013 when a freediver died at a major competition. And that kind of became my first book. And here we are.
And that's an amazing book. Everyone, that's my favorite book. I read it a year ago or something. And
thank you.
It's been an amazing thing to just go back on and read. But I love what you said about environment being the foundation of everything, and mm-hmm. our earth, and that spiritual connection, but also just the way that things unfolded for you. And it is, in terms of like having an idea, having a concept that you're attracting to you, that timeline is never definite. It's never clear. It's never
right.
So I think that that's just something I try to remind myself of, when dreaming or when creating as an artist. But
yeah, well, nobody reads the terms and conditions. You just click on it. So you get the thing, you download what you want, and then you click on the terms and conditions because you don't want to read that shit. But eventually the terms and conditions find you as you're in mid-journey.
100%. Yeah.
There are always terms and conditions.
Always. Well, so let's talk a little bit about, I know you have a wealth of knowledge around this. So can you just define for us what biodiversity is?
It's kind of you to say that. I don't know if I have a wealth of knowledge about it, but I'll do my best because it's important. It's especially important now. So biodiversity, I don't know if I'm defining it correctly, but the way I understand it is, it's kind of a marker how you gauge the health of an ecosystem. So you need to have a diverse range of flora and fauna, of plants and animals, in order to maintain a healthy ecosystem. And when that gets disrupted, if an invasive species comes in and crowds out specific kinds of plants, that's going to have a domino effect on the other species. Or if there's a predator, like you have this in the Bahamas where lionfish have proliferated, and lionfish have crowded out some of the other reef fish, and that's caused problems, not just for the fish, but for the corals. Or you have it where I dive, these purple sea urchins, and they proliferate and they eat all the kelp, and they crowd out the black sea urchins, but there's no more sea otters. So the sea otters used to keep those in check by eating them, but we don't have them down here. They're only up around Monterey now, but they used to be all up and down this coast. And so we have a kelp problem here. And so a biodiverse ecosystem, biodiversity is, do we have the right diverse array of species to keep a system healthy? And so that's the way I define it, as far as my understanding of it. And if you don't have it, then you have a weak system. And you could say the same thing. That's that diversity in genes. That's like why crossbreed dogs are healthier than purebred dogs. We're seeing companies be more interested in diversity and hiring. I think that's going to create a stronger company. And so that same idea, you have to have that in nature because that's the foundational element of everything.
I think sometimes the missing link for when you're trying to uncover why this would be important for you, we're always looking at it from somewhat of a self-absorbed viewpoint at first, like how does this even affect me?
Right.
I think sometimes we forget that if this is out of balance, it does have that domino effect, like you're saying, like this does eventually affect us. It is about supporting the environment, the collective whole, the health and well-being of our environment. But it's also like the recognition that, I mean, we're all connected. So this does affect us. If the bees no longer exist, we're not going to have nuts and fruits, that kind of thing.
Right. And, the bees can be domesticated. So there are beekeepers that go around and pollinate. So, I don't know how much about the bee die-off is going to impact food anytime soon, but I can tell you that our every second breath relies on the ocean, comes from ocean plants. And if the ocean doesn't have the correct biota, doesn't have the right kelp, doesn't have the right algae, doesn't have the plankton that it needs, it's not just the species in the ocean that will die, it's our oxygen production. And so that's pretty directly connected to our lives. So yes, I mean, but you're right in the fact that a lot of people don't have an understanding of that or of history in general. So we end up, spinning our wheels and making some mistakes over and over again. But hopefully now, people are waking up and I it's encouraging now because there's, when Trump was in office, in the way even though there's this knowledge out there that our biodiversity is threatened, that we're approaching something that could be, we don't know if it is, but could be something called the sixth extinction. There's been 5 major extinction waves over the course of Earth's history. And the most recent one being the dinosaurs and the mammals. After that, the ice age die-off. And now we are approaching a point where, I'm reading a book called The Sixth Extinction, which is quite a pick-me-up. You should get it. No, but it's a great book. And it's saying something like 1/3 of reef-building corals, 1/3 of freshwater mollusks, 1/3 of sharks and rays, 1/4 of all mammals, 1/5 of all reptiles, 1/6 of all birds are headed towards extinction. And so they're not all extinct yet, but they're heading that way. And so that is alarming. And that's going to have an effect on the balance of the earth and our lives here. So, and still we're opening up places like the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge to possible oil and gas development. Bears Ears was shrunk. All sorts of things are happening, which is kind of the opposite of what should happen. And now Biden's in there and he's pledged to join something called the 30 by 30, which is 30% of land and 30% of marine areas protected as preserves by 2030. And that's what scientists are recommending we do, because if you do that, then you have a place to kind of a refuge for intact ecosystems and kind of a biodiversity bank that hopefully will withstand the worst effects of climate change and kind of blunt the effects of this sixth extinction and keep the earth healthy and balanced.
Yeah. So in terms of thinking about it from a corporation perspective, what can be done on that level? Like what type of awareness or action from an organization, from a corporation, like even an ad agency, from an advertising perspective?
I don't know. If you're looking at it from an ad perspective, I would look at what Patagonia is doing. So, Patagonia, even before George Floyd and other companies starting to step up and trying to do better, some of that is real. I think some of it's probably just a veneer. But Patagonia was very early on kind of an activist corporation. I'm not saying every company needs to be that strident, because they are. And, I think the first thing they did, there was like some sort of a bigoted anti-gay measure that was being put in place in Utah, and they pulled it out of the big show there. I forget what the name of the show is off the top of my head, but they pulled out, and they basically Salt Lake City lost it. Like the whole convention went elsewhere. Wow. They were the first people to do that, and now they've been on the right side of Bears Ears. They've been agitating for 30 by 30. They've signed on to that pledge, and there's other companies doing that. I think it depends on the corporation, what they feel like they can do. But I think when you realize that we have systemic problems, no one's making money. Like I've always thought this thing with a social safety net, right? Like why are there people out there that don't want a bigger social safety net for people who are struggling to have a little bit more resources? Like that will only get them more buying power, which will make everybody more money. So like, if I look at it that way and you look at the environment, if I'm a corporation in business, I want to look at it 50 years down the line, not like 5 days down the line. So I want to stay in business for my kids to take over this business or pass the shares on to grandkids. Well, that's not going to happen if there is no business. So, I like to think of it that way. If you take a longer view, then you have to take the earth into account. You can't just leave it out. It's not something that someone else will take care of. None of this is something someone else will take care of. And while they're big, large problems, and we need unity to solve them, I do think business is part of that. And so I don't have a really pat answer for you, but I would like, if it comes to taking a stand on the development of a national park or opening up a wildlife refuge, to me, that seems like a no-brainer. Obviously, in this hyper-politicized age, it isn't. But I think that businesses have a role in there somewhere. Advertising-wise, you guys are shaping people, how they think about things without them even knowing it. So I think there's a lot of subversive ways tackling the human mind. I used to read a magazine called Adbusters. I'm not aging myself. I don't know if you guys ever remember Adbusters, but Adbusters was like written, I think, developed by copywriters who and advertising professionals, and it was very subversive. And I used to love that publication.
Well, I think it is vital that we just be thinking about it, because we're in it for the long game, family and generations, and just the health of the entire environment long term. So one of the questions that we end on, and if we have time, maybe we can talk a little bit about plastics and reducing single-use plastic. But the other question, the question we like to end with for guests is, if you were to give us one piece of advice, an action step that we could take tomorrow to make the world a healthier and happier place, what would that be, or what would your personal insight on that be?
Well, I think the first is to read up on this. And I joked about this title, Sixth Extinction. It's been, a lot. It won the Pulitzer Prize, so I'm not the first guy to recommend this book to you, but it's really remarkable. And Elizabeth Kolbert's a New Yorker reporter, and it's very readable. It's very engaging, and it's not, even though the subject is depressing, it doesn't make you feel depressed as you're reading it. It makes you feel interested in this world, and it goes back. She covers all the other 5 extinction waves, and then right up into what's happening now. And so I recommend that. It's a good kind of primer on biodiversity. If you're interested in 30 by 30, like I said, the US has signed on to it, which is good, but that still it's going to require people active to help promote the protection of different marine protected areas, or new national or state parks. And the reason that's important is I know somebody who worked in an environmental nonprofit connected to surfing, and he was run out of his job for promoting 30 by 30 because some surfers that were fishermen were angry about it and didn't quite understand what 30 by 30 was. So there is this vocal opposition against protection because they feel like it's a government overreach or it limits freedom. So there's going to be a role for people who are interested in protecting land and water to be active. I don't know what that role is yet. It's not kind of clear just yet. So there's that. But finally, like, the way I look at these big questions is they're not going to be solved through polarized viewpoints. It's going to be solved through unity, or it won't get solved. And maybe it won't get solved, quite frankly, the way things are going. But like, I tend to not side in with the polarized viewpoint. I don't try to take, I think it's good to express yourself, but it's not good to try to win an argument when the argument is this big. I think you can try to lead people the best you can, and that's all you can do. And so I wouldn't try to win arguments. I think unity is going to be the way to get people to get us to fix these problems. And so if that's the one thing I would just leave. I'm babbling now, but I think that's the main thing, is that I see a lot of these that ends up being, red or blue or Republican, Democrat, this or that, you're right, you're wrong, blah, 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 all that stuff. That's not going to help us at this point. So we just need to recruit people into this idea that we are in trouble, even though we're comfortable right now. There is a growing kind of environmental problems out there. And we need more and more people to understand that, so that we can have the right people in place to fix it.
Yeah, I think that's great insight. And I mean, what I hear you saying in that too is just, it's not about an opinion or right or wrong. It's really about supporting a greater good, which is the environment.
Yeah.
How we coexist and the bedrock that rests on.
I mean, everyone, nobody wants the ocean without whales, right? And the ocean is a great place to finish on this, because the ocean regenerates really quickly. Now, coral reefs are in great danger. I'm not saying that, but like, there was a time where almost all whale species were endangered, or on the brink of it. And some look like they're going to go extinct. And now that's just not the case. Like they're because we're not using whale blubber for oil and energy. That's a big part of it. And we banned whaling, but that just shows you that whale species pop back. And the same thing has been shown in areas that have been almost fished out. There's a groundfish fishery in Central California that was completely fished out. The commercial fishermen were completely out of work. The Nature Conservancy bought the fishery and basically banned fishing and helped regenerate and let that population come back. And they sold it back to the Commercial Fishery Association for $1. And they were able to go in, and now there's a viable groundfish fishery in Central California. It's like a snapper type fish, but it was almost gone. So, the marine protected areas, that's the one thing fishermen get angry about. Marine protected areas are actually nurseries to repopulate fisheries. It's actually a good thing for fishing, but it has to be explained that way, because yes, you can't fish here, but you can fish right over there. And the idea is that this nursery here, they'll get too many fish there, and the fish will have to leave and repopulate it elsewhere. So this is not about ending a certain way of life. This is about perpetuating life.
That's great. That's great insight. And it also just speaks to that degree of communication, and the way that we present ideas is really important as well. And just we have to meet people where they are.
Yes.
And give kind of the benefit to them, and then explain more science behind it as well. So if you want to follow Adam, you can find him on Instagram at Adam Skolnick, and then his website is just adamskolnick.com. I just appreciate the discussion on our environmental impact as an individual, but also, long term, generationally, what that can look like.
Well, being in Boulder and Denver, and that's your, I think you guys are all kind of, that's part of why you're there. So that's good. And it's cool to have, you guys are out there helping shape opinions all around the world. And you're doing it from a place that is really kind of an environmental jewel, Colorado. So it's cool that to be here and to be a part of that. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Adam, for sharing your energy with us and just your time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.